Okay, thank you. The Honourable Leader of Opposition.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr Deputy President. I seek to make a contribution on the point-to-point taxis and hire vehicles bill 2016. Of course, it's a matter of record that the Labor opposition set the standard in relation to engaging public policy with the emerging rideshare operation in New South Wales. It's not a question of whether you're for or against the so-called sharing economy. It is here. Customers are availing themselves of the services it affords, and it was also a matter of record that the existing regulatory frameworks did not properly engage with what was happening on the street, as it were. And it is also a matter of record that Transport for New South Wales was not enforcing the laws that then applied. I acknowledge that interjection, bungling the application of existing regulatory standards. And it was the Labor opposition who said that public policy had to change to recognise, to embrace, but also to regulate the activities of those providing services in the sharing economy. And the Labor leader in the other place, the Honourable Luke Foley MP, set three standards or three key principles that would guide Labor in the way in which we developed policy in this space. One was raising the standard of services provided to the wider public. The second was reinforcing and enhancing public safety standards. And the third was reinforcing or indeed creating the framework to properly underpin minimum driver remuneration standards. And we think that these three key principles should apply to all service providers in what is termed the point-to-point transport industry for the purposes of the bill now before the House. And applying those three principles to the bill before us, we do not oppose the terms of the bill because there are many things in the bill that are good and are worthwhile. And we recognise, for example, the creation of safety duties and safety standards for providers of both taxi services and of booking services, and for the provision generally of passenger services, including the mechanisms for the enforcement of those standards are both new developments in this space and are good. And we also note, although we have had criticisms of the work health and safety standards adopted by this government, which we think are frankly inferior in substance and inferior in the way that they are enforced compared to the previous occupational health and safety regime, we also welcome the fact that the health and safety regime embedded in this legislation is at least consistent with the general health and safety standards in workplaces in this state, not creating differential standards. So we think that is a good thing, although in future we of course would like to raise those standards. I won't canvass all of the aspects of the legislation that previous speakers have touched on, but I will go to a couple of things which we will deal with when the bill is considered in the Committee of the Whole in detail. We do think there are significant concerns about driver remuneration. We understand that Chapter 6 of the Industrial Relations Act does deal with the taxi industry, but it's a matter of record that there is no minimum driver remuneration standards applicable to Uber or applicable to any other entity that may provide services in this space either now or into the future. And if I were the Taxi Council, if I were a taxi plate owner, if I were a driver, if I were a network operator or a booking service, well, leave the booking services aside, I would be very concerned that the taxi industry will continue to have to meet minimum labour standards when, under this government's regime, Uber and other service providers get, as it were, a free ride. The fact is that all service providers in the point-to-point transport space should have to meet the same standards. I think that should be an accepted and cross-partisan position. And I note that the Minister, with carriage of this legislation in the other place, has made a reference to the relevant Parliamentary Standing Committee with a reference about industrial relations issues. Frankly, I think some of the terms of reference are deficient and are misconceived, because a number of the acts referred to the committee about how these various legislative enactments apply to this emerging industry are misconceived in the sense that they in fact just do not apply. Chapter 6 of the Industrial Relations Act has no application to Uber or like service providers. The Independent Contractors Act has no application. Well, it may do, but it doesn't have any application in the sense of creating a regime to create and provide for the enforcement of minimum labour standards. I understand that the committee understands the shortcomings of the Minister's reference and will fill in the gaps under any other associated matter. But the point is, this legislation is, I think, marred by the fact that there is not even a cursory effort to create a level playing field for all operators in the industry around what is for us a core issue of minimum labour standards for all those performing work in this space. And it shouldn't matter whether you're a taxi driver or whether you're an Uber driver or a Link driver or a driver for any other passenger service, there should be a relevant minimum labour standard that applies, or a mechanism by which you as a driver can access to make sure you get a fair day's pay for a fair day's work. I wouldn't have thought in the early 21st century that would be a radical or exceptional proposition. I know that some service providers in this space have embraced the notion of freedom of contract, that people should be free to agree to any standard of remuneration, no matter how low. I think such an Ayn Rand theory of the world is naive, because it fails to...
Horrible freedom. You wouldn't want too much of it, would you?
I think the problem with that notion is it fails to have reference to any reality. The fact is, people who provide labour, whether you're an employee or an independent contractor, depending on the circumstances, of course, the fact is you often do not have the same bargaining power as those who offer you the work and ultimately provide the circumstances by which you derive remuneration to support yourself and your family. And even from time to time, the conservative parties of this state and this nation have at least paid lip service to the notion that you do need an industrial regulatory framework to set minimum standards.
Your election defeats reminded me of that.
I acknowledge that interjection, but let's not get carried away here.
Order. Order.
Mr.
Since we're having a little interjection there, I might just welcome our guest in the public gallery. Stop the clock, please. Can I just acknowledge our tertiary students?
Really?
Tertiary students from the Sydney University are participating in the bridging course that will assist them, Mr. Adam Searle, the Honourable Adam Searle. This will assist them to enrol in studies of law, I believe.
Oh,
so
fantastic.
you're watching you're watching.
No, we'd encourage that.
Order.
No, we'd encourage that.
Do your work.
So we
Exhibit A, Your Honour.
order. We do hope you enjoy your time in the Legislative Council, and you are watching one of the best at work. So, we'll start the clock, and the Honourable Adam Searle may continue.
Thank you. So the fact is, and let's not get carried away. Award minimums, state or federal, do not provide workers with a lavish standard of living. They provide minimums, and that's what they are. They are the bare minimum, and they should be a bare minimum for all those who work in the point-to-point transport industry. And we will propose, and we've lodged with the clerks, amendments which seek to flesh out that commitment that we on our side of the House have to all working persons. That there should be a framework to set minimum standards wherever you work, whoever you are. And I think it would create given that the legislation is seeking to iron out the inconsistencies in the point-to-point transport industry between service providers such as taxis and others who are currently not fully regulated, an obvious point of difference is to provide some labour market regulation. So we seek to fill the void that is existing in this legislation. We understand that our proposals may not at this time gain support. We understand that there will be that parliamentary inquiry, and we'll keep pressing the point for minimum labour standards applying across the board in and for this industry, including the mechanisms for enforcing those standards. We also have concerns about the adjustment assistance package or regime provided for in Schedule 3. We understand that there is a panel provided that will develop the criteria for how the funds that the Minister has referred to in his second reading speech will be applied. But we are also concerned in Schedule 3, particularly Clause 4, the discretion reposed in the Minister to determine additional assistance. That ministerial discretion, as I construe the bill, is not bound or restricted by the panel and its deliberations. He may have regard to the panel's guidelines and processes, but is not bound by them, as long as he or she says, okay, I've looked at what the panel has to say, or I look at the panel's processes, or I look at the panel's principles for operation, but I'm going to do something completely different.
It's not a reduction.
It's not a reduction, but the point is this: we are giving a Minister of the Crown, a political operative, and dare I say it, an uber discretion to provide provide in his or her discretion to apply a very significant body of funds without any published guidelines, without any ability to have them audited or scrutinised. It is, and this is not a reflection on the current office holder, it is a significant corruption risk created by this bill. It is a significant corruption risk if any public official can say, well, I'm going to apply $142 million in this adjustment package, or indeed the $98 million, providing up to $20,000 per plate holder, collected from the public, so it's going to be public money, collected from passengers, and applied. But applied how? Applied for the benefit of whom? Is it only going to benefit taxi plate owners? Is it only going to benefit potentially taxi drivers for loss of income in some circumstances? Or is it going to go to other bodies and persons? Is it, for example, I know the bill does away with the notion of accredited drivers. And I note that there are, for example, at present, a number of bodies one of whose lines of business is providing driver accreditation. Will they suffer hardship as envisaged in this bill? And will they be in line to receive some of this significant body of public monies? And if it is that latter category, I don't think people in this House, or indeed the other House who are considering this bill, would understand that the money is going to those recipients. So we don't, beyond a general notion that those in this industry suffering hardship will get access to this money according to some guideline and some principles, we have no further idea. Why? Because although the framework for collecting the money and for applying the money is set out in the bill, there is a large body of work not sketched out in the legislation, which will have to be filled in by regulation, which will have to be filled in by the panel and its deliberations, but none of that affects the Minister's discretion. The Minister's discretion, as long as he or she has regard to the panel, the Minister can do whatever he or she wants. And given that the Minister, we don't know whether an amount of money will be allotted to the panel only, or whether the Minister will abrogate to himself another amount of money, or whether the Minister and the panel will jointly disperse the two lots of money, or the three lots of money, the 10 million for hire cars, the 98 million I think it is for the hardship for plate owners, and the 142 million adjustment package. So will the panel and the Minister both be doling out the same amounts of money, or will they be limited to different pots? These are all questions to which No government minister has provided an answer, and I look to the minister in reply to provide those answers to the House. But you can see our significant concern about giving such discretion without guidelines, without restriction, to a member of the executive government. So we think,
How
given
many years have active grace payments been in existence?
well, so what we propose, what we will propose, is that the ministerial discretion, as envisaged in item 4 of the schedule.
Point of order. The Honourable Soket Moss.
Shouldn't be interjecting while the member's got the floor.
Absolutely right. I'm sorry.
Yes. The point of order is upheld. It's disorderly to interject at all times. Let the member be heard in silence.
Here, here.
Kick him out.
So our answer to these concerns is twofold. We note that Clause 159 provides that the Minister may, but doesn't have to, have a review of the whole of this Act in 12 months. But we certainly think that Schedule 3, the adjustment regime, must be reviewed in 12 months because this is an industry in transition, and to evaluate the ongoing efficacy of the different provisions, there should be a review of that adjustment package and its mechanisms in 12 months of this Act operating. So that is our amendment number 4. And we also think that the ministerial discretion should be removed from the minister and folded into the panel that is created to determine these matters.
Sensible.
The panel, of course, will be composed of representatives from the Taxi Council and from senior public servants from relevant agencies of government. It's an appropriate body to have this discretion folded into. We, of course, don't think the panel is adequately composed. We think that there should be a voice representing driver interests, and we will have amendments that deal with that.
It's a TWU official, perhaps.
We think that the voices of drivers should be heard in this forum, and we make no, and we're not at all embarrassed about those propositions.
Well, you
I'll acknowledge it's in the amendments. Yes, it will be. We propose a nominee of the Transport Workers Union. There is no mystery about that. There is no mystery about that. There is no mystery because the Transport Workers Union, like the Taxi Council, is the only registered.
The Honourable Adam Searle will refrain from speaking. There's a point of order. Order. No one people speaking over each other just makes a mockery of this House. The Honourable Shaukat Mosselman on a point of order.
The Leader of the Government and the member on the backbench would have the opportunity to speak. In the meantime, I ask you to ask them to not to be disorderly by constantly interjecting.
I have asked the members to be mindful of the interjection ruling. Please do not interject, and next time I may have to go one further and put people on a call. The Honourable Adam Searle.
Thank you, Mr Deputy President. The fact is the Transport Workers Union, like the Taxi Council, is a registered industrial organisation under the Industrial Relations Act. Like the Taxi Council, it is a respondent to various awards and determinations made by the Industrial Relations Commission of New South Wales. And as far as I am aware, it is the only legally recognised and registered voice of drivers in this industry. And that is why we nominate the TWU as the body to nominate a driver representative to the panel. We have no issue with the Taxi Council being on it. We just think that the relevant voice for working drivers should also be heard. In conclusion, we welcome the sharing economy. We do not shy from that, and we recognise that organisations such as Uber can play a positive role in providing a wider array of services to the travelling public. But any transition needs to be done in a sensible and balanced fashion. Hitherto, it has not been adequately or indeed regulated at all, and this legislation we recognise is a significant and good step towards creating a proper regulatory framework for all those in the point-to-point industry. But there are many outstanding issues, of which driver minimum remuneration standards is but one. Previous speakers mentioned compulsory third party. It's a matter of record that taxis have to pay in regional areas $3,000 or more, or in cities $8,000 or more to insure their vehicle. whereas Uber drivers apparently, and like drivers, pay only a few $100s, often telling their insurers that it's a private vehicle. I would have concerns about whether such an insurance policy would be responsive in the circumstances of any accident. I don't know what other policies Uber may have in place, or whether other like providers have adequately addressed this, but certainly I noticed that this is very much a work in progress, and it's one of the many areas where there does have to be a balancing out of the rights and interests. But we will join with the government in taking a big step forward in providing a proper regulatory framework, but we are unembarrassed about proposing what we see as improvements on the bill before the House, and we will prosecute those vigorously, both in this debate and in the days, weeks and months to come if they're not successful.
Well said.